Join me for the after lunch session. We're going to talk about that it's all about value. That having a PMO, project management office, that doesn't provide value, doesn't make any sense. We're going to look at a model for a value-driven PMO. We're going to talk about lean in context of PMOs. We're going to talk about being strategic resource driven. And last but not least is agile leadership with project management offices. Actually, when we say an agile PMO, we mean two things. We mean a PMO that is inherently in itself agile, on the one hand, and also a PMO, a project management office, that interfaces to agile teams. And what we're going to discuss is both. So for those of you who are in agile teams, how many of you here are working in agile teams? Good. How many of you have PMOs in their organization? Good, good. So we're going to have a lot to talk about. I'm going to start by saying it doesn't work. When I'm saying it doesn't work, I mean that PMOs don't work very well in most organizations. And I'm going to show you a bit later on research. And the question is, it's a Freudian association game. The question is, yes, we have a PMO in our organization and 3 dots. So what I'll ask you to do is say hello to the person next to you that you don't know yet, so you get some chance for networking. Say hello to that person and complete that sentence. I'm going to give you about 2-3 minutes for that. Complete that sentence. Yes, we have a PMO in our organization, and how would you like to complete that sentence? I've heard many things. Don't be afraid to share that. That's up to you. Just introduce yourself to the person next to you and complete that sentence with him. Go ahead. Actually, here's another question. If you wake up tomorrow and go to work, and the PMO gets shut down, it's not there anymore, will that impact your project delivery? I hear the no's. I see the no's here. It's true. It's true. It's crazy. I see the nods there as well. And it's really weird. It's weird that we have this entity in our project environment that managers are willing, executives are willing to pay for, and that stands in our way for project completion. It's almost crazy. Actually, it's like throwing money down the toilet, which actually is much better this way than hiring people, putting them in your project organization, and them becoming an obstacle for project delivery. So it's much easier doing that. You don't waste the time for hiring and putting people in place and so on. And actually, it's very easy. Truth be told, over 8 years with a certain organization, I have seen an organization that had R&D, that had operations, and had NPI, new product integration, into operation. It had about PMOs opened and closed 11 times over 8 years. And I see some more nods there. So this is not my own experience, and you see it over there. And ESI is saying about the same thing. And again, it's crazy that we're willing to pay, we as organizations are willing to pay for something that doesn't provide us value. 50% failure rate. How did we get there? Now, people are not blind. They see that. How did we get there? So I want to explain that with my friend Pete. Pete works for Londic. It's a London IT provider. And here he is. And he was recently recruited to head the PMO. Well, he didn't know really what to do. He had some background in IT. He's an engineer. He has 8 to 9, 10 years of project management. Pete is really confused with all the concepts of everything that he can do in order to build a long-lasting PMO. So maybe it's training, maybe it's reports and templates, maybe it's selecting tools, maybe he goes for the PMBOK. What's your response for PMBOK? Just want to make sure. PMBOK is? Project Management Body of Knowledge. But the thing is, usually when they say PMBOK in an Agile conference, I need to make sure that the escape exit is somewhere next to me. All right. He thinks about what to do next. So he's thinking. And my question for you, having seen that, If you were part of a PMO, what would you do? So I'm going to give you 2-3 minutes to think about that, because I've told you high failure rates. I told you what the stakeholder needs, what the user needs. I'm going to give you 2-3 minutes. Same person you were working before. If you were in this situation, what would you do? So 2-3 minutes to discuss that with that person next to you before we continue.
Think about culture.
Think about culture. That's very good. We're going to get to that later on when we discuss the model. It's very true. Any other thoughts?
What the organization does by projects.
Pardon?
What is the goal of the project?
Very good. What's the goal of project delivery in the organization? And that's something we're going to discuss. That we can create better solution, products, and results by having more process in place. Now you're chuckling here, and yet, raise of hands of people who haven't seen that in organization. I want someone who has never seen this happen in an organization, that people believe that by having a new risk register, or a new template, or a new document, no hands raised. One. I have one. That's okay. One is okay. It's really crazy. We have this belief. It's called, by the way, the Planning Fallacy, that if we add, by Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize laureate, we think that if we add process, we get project delivers faster. Now, I'm not against process. Don't get me wrong here. I'm saying that this fallacy is counterproductive. It actually holds us back many times. Now, sometimes process does help. More often than not, more process will not create results faster. Now, when I'm saying it, it makes a lot of sense. How many times do I see it go the other way around in organizations? How many times do we see PMOs actually adding more and more in a certain weird belief that it will enable them to create results faster? That's the process PMO usually fails to deliver and usually gets disbanded agile leadership. The three on the right, left, and the top have to do with the PMO in itself, inherently being agile. The fourth has to do with the interaction between the PMO, who many times represents a centralized approach for project delivery, and the agile organization, development, teams, agile organization in general. There's a big challenge here, because by definition, traditional PMOs increase waste by introducing more documents, templates, tools, best practices, lesson learned templates, what else? Risk registers, business requirement documents, functional specification documents, functional requirement documents, traceability. Do I need to continue? Right, it's quite a bit. And again, I have nothing against documentation. I have a lot against documentation that introduces waste and stops us from delivering products faster. PMO is the best suited entity to remove waste of project and process. Why is that? Why is that? Any idea?
There's sphere of influence.
Pardon?
There's sphere of influence.
It has good influence, that's true. What else? Thank you. If you think about a project manager or a Scrum team or an Agile team, they're looking at their target and they want to get there, right? They want to reach their target. If you look at the project manager, he's an action-oriented person. The team wants to get results. They're looking that way. PMO is the only centralized organization that can cut across the delivery effort and say, this is wasteful, this I don't need, this is too much, this amount of process is too much, this I can cut in about half. The only problem is that it's very difficult to reduce. It's much easier to add templates than to delete templates. If you think about that, by the way, it's like, if we can talk about the psychology behind that, it's called the endowment effect. Again, Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize laureate. We're attached to our templates. We like them because they're out there, they're ours. It's much more difficult to let go of something than to add something. It's much easier to write a new Excel spreadsheet, a new Word document, than to delete it. Even in your files, I'll challenge you, go back to your folders and see how difficult it is for you to delete files that you no longer need, because you keep saying to yourself, yeah, you know, but it doesn't take any space, it's in my laptop, you know, it's for free, I don't need to, the computer is keeping it, right? It's much more difficult to hit that delete button on your folders and get rid of Access documentation. The same is true here. It's because we're attached to it. It's difficult. And yet PMOs find it very difficult, to do that. We get better results with less. Remove document waste. That's the first method for being value-driven PMO. That's the easy part, because there is also project scope waste. And if reducing document waste and process waste is relatively difficult, reducing scope and project waste is even more difficult. If we want to be value-driven, that's the way to go. So here's an idea on how to get there. This is it's not easy, but if you're doing a waterfall organization that has top-down centralized control, one way that we've seen that works very well is Kanbaning the waterfall. So how many of you here are not familiar at all with don't be shy, don't be okay. Quite a few. How many of you know that the organization uses the time reports to build a plan, the master plan? Oh, quite a few as well. Does it work? Does this plan build on hours? Does it work? No, it doesn't. No wonder why. Because the problem that we have with project management is a complex problem, and we cannot solve it in normal means, and I would not go into that right now. I would say, though, and this is something I would like to talk a bit about, on the local level, it doesn't make sense, and you can tell that to your PMOs, it doesn't make sense to have a detailed plan. And I'm sure those of you who work in Agile know that. It just doesn't make sense, because the problem we're trying to solve is an NP problem, NP, non-deterministically polynomial problem. Those of you are already raising hands. And if this sounds as Chinese, well, it's not Chinese, but it's complex math. And NP problems are very difficult to solve if they're not solvable. Some of them are not solvable. All of them are not solvable at all for a certain size. And it's a fallacy that we have that we can use automated tools to give us solutions to these problems. And there are two approaches. There's the one that the American approach says, you pour more computer power. Pour more computer power. Solve it, solve it, solve it. And you get a solution for your resource allocation for the next 3 months. Then a week after someone is sick, what happens to the entire 3 months plan? Obsolete. One change. Completely obsoletes the plan. Or you can go with the Japanese Agile way, which says, what?
More people.
You plan according to, right, capacity change, short intervals. And you eliminate the need for an overall top-down plan for all the resources. Now here's a great reading, and I was discussing that with Michal the other day. Probably a book, if you're doing project and project management, a book that discusses that is called Critical Chain Project Management by Eli Goldratt. He's written quite a few books, The Theory of Constraints. If you're handling resource allocation, you want to understand the complexity around that, he discusses a really unique way to solve resource allocation on critical resources. So that was about a few words challenging, because Agile leadership is about collaboration and empowerment and about self-management and about servant leadership. And to tell the truth, PMOs are not really bought into this. If we really want to make it work between agility and Agile and PMOs and top-down, we have to make a commitment and a charter that works between the two worlds. Here's an example of something that we've done. More and more organizations are not willing to pay for PMOs. I had this email about 10 days ago, and this email came from a team of PMO managers in the Baltics, and they were saying, the problem we want to solve with this training, we've noticed that this is true, senior stakeholders, it's a copy-paste, in our organizations are sometimes hard to convince in a need and value of proper project and program governance, an overall role of PMO in delivering business value. And we're seeing more of that. If we're not focused on value delivery, if we're not able to align ourselves, if we're not able to align the top-down with the agile delivery, we have no place in the organization. Thank you very much for spending the last hour with me here. And thank you, Michal, for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.